Father-in-law died on a Tuesday, and by Friday, my husband's family had already decided what to do with me. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I'm exaggerating or being dramatic or letting grief twist my memory into something uglier than it was. I spent a long time wondering that myself. But I have the voicemails, I have the texts. I have a certified letter sitting in a manila folder in my desk drawer that I've read so many times the creases are starting to tear. So, no, I'm not exaggerating. Let me back up. My name is Serena. I'm 31 years old, and for the last 4 years, I've worked as a certified fraud examiner for a mid-sized financial consulting firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I know what that means, and I know most people don't. Basically, I find money that people are trying to hide, hidden assets in divorce proceedings, embezzlement buried in corporate accounts, shell companies set up to funnel money away from people who deserve it. It's detail work. It's slow, methodical, unglamorous work. And it turned out to be the exact skill set I needed when my own family tried to do it to me. My husband is Garrett. We met when I was 26 and he was 30 at a mutual friend's birthday party in Raleigh. He was funny and warm, and he had this way of listening to you like you were the only person in the room. We dated for 2 years and got married in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Asheville. His parents came. My parents came. Everyone smiled in the photos. His mother's name is Rosalind. That's important. Remember that name. Rosalind is the kind of woman who makes everything feel like an audition. Every dinner at her house, every holiday, every phone call, you always got the sense she was evaluating you and hadn't decided yet whether you'd passed. She was polished in that particular Southern way, always put together, always gracious on the surface, always with a compliment that had a small blade hidden inside it. That's such a brave color choice, Serena. You must be exhausted working those hours. I just think it's wonderful that Garrett found someone so independent. I told myself it was fine. Garrett saw it sometimes and rolled his eyes at me sympathetically, and that felt like enough. You make those little deals with yourself when you love someone. You decide which hills are worth dying on. His father, Raymond, was different, quiet where Rosalind was loud, steady where she was sharp. He called me kiddo from the first Christmas I spent with them, and he meant it warmly, and I knew it because his eyes crinkled the same way when he said it to Garrett. Raymond was the kind of man who fixed things with his hands and didn't need you to know about it. A good man, the kind that gets taken too soon. He had a heart attack in February, fast and devastating and completely without warning. He was 63 years old, and he'd been planning a fishing trip to Montana for the spring. The funeral was on a Saturday. I stood next to Garrett the whole day. I held his hand through the service, and I held it again at the graveside, and I held it again in the parking lot of his parents' house afterward, while Rosalind received guests in the living room with the rigid composure of a woman who had decided exactly how this day was going to go. I should have paid more attention to that composure. I know that now. 3 weeks after Raymond died, Rosalind called Garrett and told him she needed to sit down and discuss the estate. That seemed normal. Raymond had owned property, the family home in Concord, a commercial lot he bought in the 90s, some investment accounts. Rosalind said she wanted to make sure everything was handled properly. Garrett told me about it over dinner, and neither of us thought much of it. The meeting was on a Wednesday evening at Rosalind's house. I offered to come. Garrett said his mother had specifically asked for it to just be family for now, and I said okay. Another small deal, another hill not worth dying on. He came home 3 hours later and he couldn't look at me. I was on the couch with my laptop when he walked in. I remember the exact moment because I'd been half watching a show and half drafting a report for work. And when I heard the door, I looked up, and the expression on his face made me close the laptop. "What happened?" I said. He sat down in the armchair across from me. He was quiet for a long time. "My mom showed me Dad's will." I waited. "He left the commercial property to both of us, to me and you, jointly. And he left a trust. It's not huge, it's about 400,000, but he set it up so that it benefits our kids, future kids, whoever Garrett's family is." He paused. She didn't know about either of those things until the attorney read them. I still didn't understand why he couldn't look at me. "Garrett." She wants to restructure it, he said. She says Dad wasn't thinking clearly in his last few years, that the property was always supposed to stay in the family, meaning just her and me, and that the trust language is too broad. The trust language that includes me. Yeah, I sat with that for a moment. What does she want to do about it? He finally looked at me. She wants you to sign a postnuptial agreement, relinquishing your interest in the property and removing yourself as a beneficiary of the trust. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator humming from the kitchen. She wants me to sign away assets that your father left me. She says they were never meant for you, that Dad would have changed it if he'd had more time. Did your father ever say that to you? Ever once say that to you? He didn't answer, which was its own answer. I nodded slowly. I told Garrett I needed a few days to think about it. He said he understood. He went to bed before I did, and I sat on the couch for another 2 hours in the dark, not watching anything, just sitting. I want to be honest about what those weeks were like because I think sometimes in stories like this, people skip over the part where it's just sad, where it's not righteous anger yet, it's just grief. I grieved Raymond. I grieved the version of my marriage I'd thought we had. I grieved the easy assumption that my husband's family would protect me the way you protect people you've chosen. But I'm also a fraud examiner, and after about 4 days of grief, the part of my brain that I get paid to use started asking questions. Raymond had updated his will 14 months before he died. That's not nothing. People don't accidentally update wills. There are attorneys involved, there are signatures, there are witnesses. Raymond had looked at what he had and he had decided, deliberately and specifically, to include me. So I started asking why Rosalind was so certain he hadn't meant it. I didn't say anything to Garrett yet. I want to be clear about that, not because I was hiding things from him, but because I needed to understand what I was looking at before I brought it to him. That's how I work. I don't accuse, I document. I requested a copy of the full estate filing from the county probate court. Public record. Took less than a week to arrive. What I found was not what I expected. Raymond's estate was larger than we'd been told, significantly larger. The commercial lot, the one Rosalind wanted me to relinquish, had been appraised 2 years ago at just under $1.2 million. There was also a brokerage account that hadn't come up in the family meeting. Low 6 figures, but it was there. And there was a life insurance policy, a substantial one, with Rosalind listed as the sole beneficiary, which is completely normal, but the policy had been taken out only 18 months before Raymond died, at a time when he'd already had one cardiac event that they described to us as minor. None of this was illegal. I want to be careful here. None of what I found was, on its own, proof of anything. But I've done this work long enough to know what it looks like when someone is trying to control a narrative about an estate, and this had the shape of it. The postnuptial agreement Rosalind's attorney had drafted, I finally got Garrett to show it to me, was written so broadly that I would have been giving up not just the commercial property and the trust, but any potential future claim on any asset that Raymond had held at the time of his death. It was, to use the technical term, a mess, but a very intentional mess. I took everything to my own attorney, not the family's attorney, mine. Her name is Octavia, and she's been doing estate and family law in Charlotte for 20 years, and she looked at the post-nuptial draft for about 15 minutes and then set it down and said, "Who prepared this?" I told her. She said, "Don't sign this." I told her I had no intention of signing it. Then I went home and I had the hardest conversation of my marriage. I sat Garrett down and I walked him through everything I'd found. The property appraisal, the undisclosed brokerage account, the timing of the life insurance policy, the breadth of the postnuptial language. I showed him the documents. I didn't editorialize. I let him read. He was quiet for a long time afterward. "I didn't know about the brokerage account," he finally said. "I know." "She didn't mention it." "No." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Serena, I don't think she's doing something criminal. I think she's scared and grieving, and she's trying to protect what she has left." "I understand that," I said. But protecting what she has left shouldn't require me to give up what your father chose to leave me. She thinks he made a mistake. Then she can contest the will. That's what the legal process is for. What she cannot do is pressure me into waiving my rights before I've had a chance to understand what those rights are. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly. Okay. I want to say something about Garrett here because I think it matters. He's not a villain in this story. He was a man caught between his grief and his mother and his wife, and he handled it imperfectly the way most people would. There were weeks where he was distant, weeks where I could feel him wishing the whole problem would just resolve itself without anyone having to do anything hard. But when I laid it out for him clearly, not as a fight, but as a set of facts, he chose to stand with me. I don't want to minimize what that cost him or how much it mattered that he did it. We declined to sign the postnuptial agreement. Octavia sent a formal response to Rosalind's attorney explaining our position and requesting a full accounting of the estate assets. Rosalind did not take this well. The next 6 weeks were the ugliest period of my life. She called Garrett every few days with some new version of the same argument. She stopped inviting us to Sunday dinners. She told her sister, Garrett's aunt, that I was holding the family hostage over money, and that characterization made its way back to us through a cousin who had the decency to feel embarrassed passing it along. There was a period of about 2 weeks where Garrett came home from work looking like he'd been fighting a low-grade infection all day, every day. I hated that. I hated that she could do that to him. But here's what I kept coming back to. Raymond chose to include me. He sat across from an estate attorney, and he said, I want my daughter-in-law to have a share in this. He did that deliberately, while he was thinking clearly, and I was not going to let that be erased, because it was inconvenient for someone who hadn't been the one to make that choice. The full estate accounting came back with a number of discrepancies. Not huge, not criminal, but there were items that had been moved, sold or transferred in the weeks after Raymond's death and before probate closed in ways that reduced the apparent value of the estate. My attorney filed a formal objection with the probate court. Things got very quiet after that. Rosalind's attorney contacted Octavia and proposed a mediation. We agreed to it. I want to tell you the mediation was dramatic. It wasn't. It was 4 hours in a beige conference room with a retired judge mediating and both attorneys doing most of the talking. Rosalind sat across the table from me and didn't look at me directly the entire time. Garrett sat next to me with his knee pressed against mine under the table. That's the detail I remember most, the steadiness of that. The mediation produced an agreement. We retained our joint interests in the commercial property. The trust remained intact with its original beneficiary language. In exchange, we agreed not to pursue further investigation into the pre-probate asset transfers. Octavia advised me that what we gave up there was likely unrecoverable anyway, and that the property and the trust were what Raymond had really intended us to have. I agreed, we signed. Rosalind signed too, without looking up. That was 8 months ago. I won't tell you things are fixed between us and Rosalind. They're not. We had one dinner at her house at Christmas, and it was 2 hours of polite conversation with all the feeling carefully drained out of it, like talking to a person-shaped space where a relationship used to be. Garrett calls her every Sunday. I don't. I'm honest about why. What I'll tell you is what I've thought about most in the months since, and it's this: Raymond knew. I've come to believe that Raymond knew exactly what he was doing when he updated that will. I think he understood his wife. I think he loved her and understood her limitations, and he decided, 14 months before his heart gave out, that the family he'd built needed to include me formally and on paper because he knew what might happen if it didn't. He was right. There are people in your life who protect you after they're gone, who make decisions quietly and without fanfare while they're still here, because they're thinking about a future they won't be part of. I didn't get to thank Raymond for that. I didn't get to tell him that I saw what he did, and I understood it, and that it mattered more than I have words for. But I kept what he left me. I made sure of it, and I think, wherever he is, that was exactly what he wanted. I think about Raymond a lot more than I expected to. Not in the way you greet someone you knew for decades. I only had 4 years with him, Sunday dinners, and a few holidays, and one long afternoon helping him build raised garden beds in his backyard, while Garrett and his mother argued inside about something neither of them could let go of. But I think about the choice he made quietly, 14 months before his heart gave out, sitting across from an estate attorney and saying, include her, make it real, put it on paper. That choice is what started everything. And I've come to believe that choices like that, the ones made with integrity, without an audience, without any guarantee that anyone will ever know, those are the ones that actually hold the world together. Rosalind didn't act out of cruelty exactly. I've had enough time now to see that more clearly. She acted out of fear and grief and a belief that love is a finite resource that has to be guarded and rationed. She looked at what Raymond left me and she saw something being taken from her, when really all she had to do was look up and see that her son had built a life worth protecting. Fear does that to people. It shrinks their vision down to just the edges of what they think they're owed. I don't say that to excuse what she did. The postnuptial agreement she had drafted was predatory, plain and simple. The asset transfers before probate closed were worth looking at hard. She made choices too, and those choices had consequences, and I think on some level she understood that when she signed the mediation agreement without meeting my eyes. What I'm saying is that I don't need her to be a monster for the story to be true. She was a grieving woman who chose the wrong thing, and I was a woman who had spent years learning exactly how to find what people try to hide. That's the part that still gets me sometimes. I didn't set out to be someone who could do what I did. I just paid attention in school. I took a job that felt like a good fit. I spent years learning to be methodical and careful and to let the documents speak before I drew any conclusions. I wasn't preparing for this, but when this came, I was ready because I had built something real in myself that couldn't be taken away by a signature or a threat or a phone call to my husband designed to make him doubt me. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this who needs it. Not that you have to be a fraud examiner. Not that you have to know estate law or probate filings or what a postnuptial agreement should and shouldn't contain, but that the work you put into yourself, the discipline, the knowledge, the habit of staying steady when someone is trying to rattle you, that's not separate from your life. That is your life. That's the thing that shows up when everything else is being contested. Garrett pressed his knee against mine under the table in that beige conference room and didn't move it for 4 hours. That's also something I think about. The people who stay. The people who choose you when choosing you costs them something real. Raymond chose me in the quiet of an attorney's office. Garrett chose me in the middle of the hardest season of his life. I chose myself when I decided not to sign something I hadn't fully read. The estate settled. The property is ours. The trust stands. And I kept what I was given by a man who saw me clearly and decided I was worth protecting.